Ciao a tutti e bentornati su Retro Legends. For those entering an arcade, everything seemed simple. A row of cabinets, colored lights, metallic sounds, a coin falling into the slot. Behind that apparent simplicity, however, existed a complex economic system, regulated by thin margins, fragile balances, and quick decisions. Arcades were not just places of entertainment, but real commercial activities, often managed as micro-industries with high capital turnover. Every game had a cost. Every credit had to be recovered. Each machine had to produce enough to justify the space it occupied. The arcade business only worked if everything ran perfectly. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's begin. Between the late 70s and early 80s, the economic model of arcades took on a stable and repeatable form. The initial successes showed that coin-operated video games could function as a continuous monetization system based on microtransactions. Each game represented an autonomous unit of consumption, easily measurable and immediately liquid. The concept of turnover became central. The profitability of a cabinet did not depend on the absolute number of players, but on the frequency with which the same physical space was occupied by new users. The shorter the average game duration, the higher the number of credits collected throughout the day. This transformed playing time into a controllable economic variable. The initial investment was calculated based on a programmed return. Managers estimated the number of games needed to cover the machine's cost, including operating expenses and profit margins. Once that threshold was surpassed, the arcade cabinet began to generate net profit. This approach fostered quick decisions. Games that didn't show signs of return within a set period were replaced without hesitation. The balancing of the gaming experience thus acquired a precise economic function. The most effective titles were those capable of creating a perceptible progression in the first moments, offering a sense of control and improvement. At the same time, they introduced structural limits that prevented prolonged sessions with a single credit. The result was a carefully crafted balance, where the player's emotional involvement was used as a tool to stimulate continuous reinvestment. In this way, the arcade cabinet established itself as a machine designed not only to entertain, but to optimize the relationship between time, space, and earnings, laying the groundwork for an economic model that would influence the entire industry in the years to come. The acquisition methods for arcade cabinets directly influence the daily management of arcades and the risk profile of the business. Direct purchase represented the most financially demanding choice. Capital was tied up from the start, with the goal of recovering it through a steady flow of income over time. This solution rewarded managers with greater financial availability and a deep understanding of the market, capable of identifying titles with high earning potential. The main advantage of purchasing lay in total control of the machine. Once the break-even point was surpassed, every credit inserted contributed directly to net profit. However, this strategy amplified exposure to risk. An unattractive title, a rapid decline in interest, or a prolonged breakdown could jeopardize the entire investment, with no possibility of recovery. Well, renting offered a more flexible alternative. In this model, the operator reduced the initial outlay and transferred part of the risk to the supplier. Contracts usually provided for a revenue split or a periodic fee, making costs more predictable. This solution proved particularly suitable for small arcades, seasonal venues, or contexts where demand was uncertain. A further distinctive element of renting was operational support. The renter took care of extraordinary maintenance, the replacement of faulty components, and, in some cases, the updating of game boards. This lightened the operator's management burden, reducing machine downtime. In return, the supplier retained a significant share of the revenues, limiting the long-term earning potential. The model favored stability over profit maximization, configuring itself as a conservative but sustainable choice, especially in a sector characterized by rapid changes in taste and a high obsolescence of titles. In short, setting the price of a game was one of the most sensitive elements in managing an arcade. Each rate was set in relation to the local economic context, taking into account the average income, nearby competition, and the type of clientele. Arcades frequented mainly by students or young people had to adopt lower prices, while those located in tourist areas or urban centers could apply higher rates. The price directly influenced the pace of machine usage. A unit cost that was too low increased the number of games, accelerating component wear and reducing the perceived value of the experience. Conversely, an excessive price limited access, reducing game frequency and shifting attention towards cheaper alternatives. Economic sustainability, therefore, lay within a narrow range, requiring continuous adjustments. This dynamic was reflected in game design. The average game duration was calibrated to maintain a constant flow of credits, avoiding both overly short sessions, which would have generated immediate frustration, and excessively long sessions, which would have reduced turnover. The initial levels were designed to be accessible, allowing the player to learn the mechanics and perceive initial progress. The progressive increase in difficulty followed a precise logic. Once the introductory phase was over, the game began to demand greater precision and tighter reaction times, increasing the probability of error. This mechanism interrupted prolonged sessions and stimulated the insertion of new credits. The difficulty curve thus became an economic tool, integrated into the gameplay with the aim of optimizing the relationship between playing time and revenue. The difficulty structure in arcade games was designed as a system for regulating economic flows. The level of challenge didn't solely respond to recreational needs, but was calibrated to control the average game duration and, consequently, the frequency of credit insertion. Every element of the gameplay contributed to this balance, from the enemy placement to the management of available resources. The initial stages were crafted to convey an immediate sense of competence. The player had to perceive rapid improvement, enough to justify the investment of the first coin. This initial accessibility reduced early abandonment and encouraged repeat plays. Once this connection was established, the game progressively increased the pressure, introducing more punitive mechanics and ever smaller margins for error. The so-called difficulty spikes represented deliberate control points. These difficulty spikes interrupted overly prolonged sessions, preventing a single credit from yielding excessive playtime. Their placement was not accidental, but often coincided with changes in scenery, new types of enemies, or sudden variations in game rules. Many cabinets allowed internal adjustments accessible only to operators. Through physical settings, it was possible to modify key parameters such as the number of starting lives, enemy resistance, or attack speed. These options allowed the game's economic behavior to be adapted to the specific context of the arcade, optimizing earnings based on the audience. The visual impact of an arcade cabinet was one of the main tools for attracting the public. In an environment characterized by constant noise, intermittent lights, and simultaneous stimuli, a game had to immediately stand out to capture attention. Legibility from a distance became a priority design criterion. Large sprites, high contrast color palettes, and distinct animations allowed the game to be identified even without approaching the machine. The sound component played a complementary role. Recognizable effects and distinctive musical loops acted as acoustic signals, capable of attracting players even outside the direct field of vision. This contributed to creating a continuous perceptual presence, keeping the cabinet active even when it was not occupied. From an economic perspective, graphics took on the role of a competitive element. Each machine found itself physically competing with adjacent ones to capture time and attention. A visually less impactful title risked being ignored, regardless of gameplay quality. The layout of the arcade amplified this dynamic. Central and more visible positions were reserved for games with greater attraction potential. In this context, visual quality was not judged solely in aesthetic terms, but on its ability to generate foot traffic. An effective arcade cabinet transformed graphics into a commercial lever, used to interrupt the flow of visitors and convert curiosity into inserted credits. The maintenance of arcade cabinets was a structural component of the business, not an occasional intervention. Intensive use subjected every element to continuous stress. Buttons and joysticks were pressed thousands of times a day, with inevitable wear and tear that required frequent replacements. The screens, often on for many consecutive hours, suffered from brightness issues, burn-in, and image instability. Power supplies and electronic boards were affected by power surges and environmental conditions that were not always ideal. Breakdowns occurred regularly and had to be considered part of the operational cycle. An inactive cabinet did not generate revenue, but continued to occupy space and represented an opportunity cost. The duration of technical downtimes directly influenced the overall profitability of the arcade, making it essential to minimize intervention times. For this reason, many managers developed basic technical skills. The ability to quickly replace worn components, adjust faulty contacts, or resolve wiring issues allowed them to avoid long waits for external assistance. In more complex cases, the support of specialized technicians remained indispensable, but it was used strategically to keep costs down. Maintenance represented a continuous and often underestimated expense in the planning phase. However, its effective management determined the difference between an operational arcade and one constantly facing difficulties. In a model based on constant revenue streams, the ability to keep machines functional was as important as the choice of the games themselves. The management of cabinet rotation responded to strict economic logic. Each machine was constantly monitored based on daily and weekly earnings. Performance was not evaluated in absolute terms, but in relation to the space occupied and the potential of available alternatives. A cabinet that generated less revenue than the average was considered inefficient, regardless of the game's quality. The physical arrangement within the arcade reflected this economic hierarchy. Central positions, more visible and subject to higher traffic, were reserved for titles with the highest yield. Less performing machines were moved towards peripheral areas, where the flow of players was reduced. This placement further influenced earnings, often accelerating the decline of titles already in difficulty. The evaluation period for a game was generally brief. In the first days or weeks, the game's ability to attract attention, retain players, and encourage repeat plays was measured. If these indicators did not reach satisfactory levels, the game was quickly replaced. Rarely were extended adaptation periods granted, as the opportunity cost of maintaining an unprofitable machine outweighed the potential benefits. This mechanism favored a rapid and often ruthless selection. Titles capable of making an impact did so almost immediately, while those that failed to emerge were excluded before they could develop a stable player base. The continuous rotation transformed the arcade into a highly competitive environment, where a game's survival depended solely on its ability to generate revenue. The arcade sector often operated in a fragmented regulatory environment, which fostered the emergence of opaque practices. In the absence of systematic controls, some operators directly tampered with the machine's accounting systems. The internal counters, used to record the number of credits inserted, were in some cases altered to declare lower earnings than the actual ones, especially in dealings with renters or commercial partners. Another widespread practice involved manipulating game settings. By reducing the number of starting lives, increasing enemy speed, or altering critical parameters, some operators artificially shortened the average game duration. This intervention increased the coin flow in the short term, but compromised the player's experience, generating frustration and reducing loyalty. The use of non-original circuit boards represented another significant phenomenon. Unauthorized copies or modified versions of games were used to cut acquisition costs and circumvent licensing fees. These solutions often led to stability and compatibility issues, damaging the game's image and reducing official support from manufacturers. In more extreme cases, some machines were modified to retain tokens or divert part of the earnings to parallel systems, making it difficult to trace revenues. These practices affected both players, who faced unfair behavior, and manufacturers and operators, who were deprived of a legitimate share of the revenue. The spread of these irregularities was favored by poorly regulated environments and a complex supply chain, where responsibilities and controls were often diluted. In the long run, such practices contributed to eroding trust in the system, exacerbating the difficulties of a sector already under strong economic pressure. With the evolution of home hardware, the technological gap between arcades and private homes significantly narrowed. Consoles began to offer visually compelling experiences, prolonged gameplay, and a virtually non-existent marginal cost per game. This change altered the perception of the value of the arcade experience, which until then had justified payment by credit thanks to an evident technical superiority. The public reconsidered the relationship between expenditure and entertainment time. A single coin in the arcade guaranteed only a few minutes of play, while buying a home title allowed for repeated sessions without additional costs. This asymmetry made the token-based model increasingly unsustainable, especially for the most avid players. At the same time, consumer habits changed. The home experience offered greater comfort, continuity, and control. The ability to save progress, adjust difficulty, and play without time limits met needs that arcades couldn't satisfy without compromising their economic model. In this context, only arcades capable of differentiating themselves managed to retain a user base. Experiences that required bulky, expensive, or technically complex hardware, difficult to replicate at home, retained specific value. The remaining success of arcades was thus linked to their ability to offer something beyond simple video games, transforming the arcade into a distinct and complementary experience compared to home gaming. The economic model of arcades had a lasting influence on the development of video games as a commercial product. The design philosophies adopted in arcades introduced a systematic approach to balancing the experience, where playtime, difficulty, and progression were calibrated according to measurable economic objectives. This method transformed game design into a tool for managing player behavior. The need to quickly grab attention helped define visual and sound standards that are still recognizable today. Immediate interfaces, constant feedback, and high legibility became central elements of the presentation. Even outside of arcades, these principles continued to guide the design of experiences crafted to capture and maintain interest in competitive environments. Economically, The token system anticipated models based on consumption fragmentation. The idea of monetizing the experience through discrete, repeatable units influenced subsequent strategies, adapted to different technological contexts. The measurability of player behavior, introduced with credit counters, provided a precedent for data analysis and optimization of usage flows. Finally, arcades helped define a balance between accessibility and limitation. Experiences had to be immediately understandable, yet structured in a way that they wouldn't quickly run out. This principle continued to be applied in various forms, demonstrating how the arcade business was not just an outdated model, but a conceptual matrix that profoundly influenced the evolution of the video game industry. Arcades operated as highly structured economic systems, in which every element was designed to support a precise financial balance. Nothing was left to chance. The layout of the machines, the length of the games, the difficulty level, and even the audiovisual feedback all responded to a logic of revenue optimization. Every single credit inserted represented the result of a series of decisions made upstream, connecting design, management, and consumption in a single operational cycle. The token was not just a means of payment, but the fundamental unit of the entire model. Around it, game experiences, duration of stay, public expectations, and the sustainability of the business were calibrated. A game that was too short generated frustration. One that was too long reduced profitability. The operation of the arcade depended on the ability to continuously maintain this balance, adapting to variations in audience, technology, and economic context. Understanding the arcade business meant going beyond its playful aspect. It allowed us to see video games as industrial products, subject to concrete constraints and constant compromises. Many of the solutions adopted arose from economic necessity rather than creative impulse, directly influencing the language and structures of the medium. The story of arcades was built on simple and rigorous mechanisms, supported by metallic clinks, flashing lights, and streams of coins. A story where fun and profit had to coexist in the same confined space, making every game not just a play experience, but a small economic act designed to balance the books. And with this, our journey into the past comes to an end. How many of these curiosities did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thank you for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.